Thank you all for joining. Today is October 16, 2022. We have an Israeli-Palestinian Confederation simulation with Professor LUSTICK. I met with him before, and I believe that I am pronouncing his name correctly.
Yes.
So before we start with the simulation, I first want to thank my friend, Dan Chapin, who has been helping for years now with these simulations. And he's been so devoted. We spend hours and hours together trying to make the simulation better. We used to meet with Ruth Chapin, his mother, for several years too. And unfortunately, she passed away at the age of 93. She was a lawyer, and she helped me on the legal aspect, and Dan is an engineer, and he's helping me both on the legal aspect and the technology, and I'm very, very thankful to Dan. Thank you so much, Dan. Today we have a simulation with LUSTICK. We are proposing a common government for the people of Israel and Palestine, a government that would exist and will be created separately from the existing Israeli government or the Palestinian government, a common government for the people in Gaza, the West Bank, and Israel, 14 million people. It would be created independently and separately from the Israeli and the Palestinian governments. Our goal is peace between the Israelis and the Palestinians. And we believe that this goal could be reached by having a true democracy for the people of Israel and Palestine, in the 14 million people in Israel, the West Bank, and Gaza. My name is Joseph Avasar. My email is josephavassar@gmail.com. You can send me your comments, and I will be happy to respond. We have a website. I'd like to share the website. Let me see if I'm connecting. Okay, I have to. I have to stop the pointer option in order. Okay. Sorry about that. Okay, here is the website. It's going to come up. So that you know, the website has many of our previous simulations. And with many people, many speakers that we had. And you can also register for our new simulations and new meetings. The website has our Constitution, and the Constitution explains what this common government contains, how it be created. It would be a secular government for the people of Israel and Palestine, with separation of power between the legislative, the executive, and the judicial branch. You can go to the website and read the Constitution, or you can also go to the frequently asked questions and understand the concept of that we are proposing in a more question and answer format. Like I said, you can go to the website and listen to other simulations we had with many other people, and many of the questions that you probably have been answered in the simulations, and it's also on our question and answers in the website. Today we have Professor LUSTICK. Dr. LUSTICK is an emeritus professor of political science at the Political Science Department of the University of Pennsylvania. He received his PhD in political science from the University of Berkeley. He taught 15 years at Dartmouth College and worked for 1 year as an analyst on Israel-Palestine affair in the Department of State. Sorry, I'm coming out of a cold. He received awards for his research from the Social Science Research Council, the National Endowment for the Humanities, the Carnegie Corporation, the National Science Foundation, and the United States Institute of Peace. He has published widely in the fields of Middle East politics, comparative politics, social science, methodology, U.S. foreign and national comparative politics, security policy, and social science-based computer simulation. His present research focuses on the implication of the one-state reality for Israel and Palestine. His current book is Paradigm Lost, and I have the link if you want to buy the book, and I also asked Professor LUSTICK to put that in the chat so you can all copy and buy his book. Our future events will be on October 30th with May Pundak. She's an Israeli lawyer. She's a feminist, activist, and social entrepreneur. She is with an organization with another Confederation idea called Land for All, and she will speak about their concept of a confederation, and we will compare it to our concept. We think that our concept is much, much better. Their concept, in my opinion, is really about two-state solution. We are not in favor of any substantive, for us to make any substantive solution. We are only offering a system for the Israelis and the Palestinians to work together based on democratic principles, for 300 parliament members to decide issues regarding land, security, or whatever else they see fit. We will have on November 13, Aaron David Miller. He is a former U.S. State Department Middle East analyst and a negotiator in Republican and Democratic administration. He's been on CNN many times, in the LA Times, and the New York Times many times. On November 27, we will have Mordechai Kedar. He is a doctor at Bar Ilan University. He was a IDF military intelligence officer on Islamic issues, and he's a current pundit defending Israel. He's, I believe he's very much on the right side of the political discussion on Israel-Palestine, but we are inviting everyone, the left, the right, the middle, anarchist, whoever, in order to discuss our concept. We think our concept is good. The concept can stand any scrutiny, and we are inviting everyone from every point of view. The simulation timeline is estimated to be 120 minutes. We will have several segments in the simulation, and after each segment, we will speak with the Professor LUSTICK for about 5 minutes, and then we'll go into the next segment. And then after the 3 or 4 segments, we will have a conversation with Professor LUSTICK and Q&A with the audience and the speaker. And then we'll have closing remarks. We have a video that explains the concept of a common confederation that we are proposing, and I'd like to play it.
The conflict between Israelis and Palestinians has endured for generations. And instead of time healing the wounds, it's only caused the anger to fester and the violence to grow. But what if there was a way to alleviate the tension? Something that may not outright solve every problem, but at least create a forum that encourages a peaceful compromise. Welcome to the Israeli-Palestinian Confederation, a common third government between the Israeli and Palestinian citizens, specifically designed
Sorry.
to foster peace, tolerance and economic prosperity between the two nations. Here's how it works. First off, both Israel and Palestine will keep their respective governments. Israel's Knesset and the Palestinian National Authority will remain unchanged. The Israeli-Palestinian Confederation, IPC, will be a third entity acting as a unifying agent between the two. The IPC will comprise 300 parliament members elected from 300 districts in Israel, the West Bank, and Gaza. Above them will preside a president and vice president, one Israeli and one Palestinian. In order for the IPC to pass a law, it will require a 55% majority from its Israeli representatives, as well as a 55% majority from its Palestinian representatives, thereby preventing either side from monopolizing the legislature. Of course, the IPC won't undermine the political power of either the Israeli or the Palestinian government. At any time, Israel or Palestine may veto a law passed by the IPC. If neither side vetoes, the law is passed. And the two nations are another step closer to resolution. Please help us make this a reality. The Israeli-Palestinian Confederation. We might speak different languages, but we all mean the same thing.
So we would like to conduct a pre-simulation survey to see how the audience react. What do you think about a common government? And then when we are done with the simulation, we will conduct a post-simulation survey to see if there is any change. So right now, I'm going to be asking everyone to vote. Do you support a common government for the people of Israel and Palestine at this time to make peace? Okay, okay. So right now we have 22 out of 25, which is 88%. Oh, yeah, 88% yes. And 3 out of 25, which is 12% voting no. Okay. So that, Professor Lustig, so that you know, a lot of the people that are here today have appeared before us, have appeared with us many, many times before, so they understand the concept, and that's why we have this high vote in the yes vote. It doesn't reflect the society Israel. It's not going to reflect how Israelis in general or Palestinians feel, in my opinion, but it reflects, in my opinion, the possibility of Israelis and Palestinians accepting it once they understand the concept and once they understand that it has no risk to them whatsoever and can only give them peace. All right. Our objective in the simulation is to demonstrate how the IPC could make peace between Israel and Palestine and its neighbors. So I would like to emphasize here that we're also talking about peace with the neighbors, such as Syria, Lebanon, Egypt, all the other Arab countries, and Israel and Palestine. We are not anti-Israeli, we are not anti-Palestinians, we are pro-peace. Professor Lustig is not a representative of the IPC. He was invited to give his opinion because we are conducting a stress test. We're inviting people with different points of views, and Professor Lustig is one of them. We are pro-peace. We follow our own narrative, not the Israeli narrative, not the Palestinian narrative. And we believe that when a common government will be created, it will follow its own narrative. It's not going to be following the Israeli narrative or the Palestinian. It will have a global eye view vision of the whole area. I expect to have a rigorous discussion today. We do not preclude other formulas, and we are not claiming to be the only formula, and we're not claiming to be exclusive. We think that others should be representing their formula for peace, and we will welcome them. We will ask Professor Lustig to judge our plan based on these criteria. Could the IPC formula make peace? Is the IPC plan implementable? Is there a downside for either the Israelis or the Palestinians? In my opinion, the answer to the first question is yes. The second question is yes. And the third question is no. We will ask Professor Lustig to judge us based on the alternative, not based on perfection. There cannot be ever a system that is perfect. We will ask Professor Lustig, judge us based on what is the alternative to a common government. We will be proposing legislation and constitution. What we will be showing is just the tip of the iceberg. It's for purposes of demonstration only. There are many, many legislation we can show that would help make peace between the Israelis and the Palestinians. We can only show few, 2 or 3 at a time, but we're asking you to look at the big picture and avoid technical arguments because we are limited by time and we don't want to get into technicalities. We're asking that you refrain from comments, but we are encouraging questions. We've seen many, many comments in the past, such as this is unrealistic, Israel never allow it to happen. We're asking you to refrain from comments during the simulation. This is a speech. I'm sorry, this is a simulation, not a speech. And because of that, we want to be positive. Comments tend to be argumentative. So please refrain from commenting until the end or put your comments in the chat. Chat is very powerful. But however, we are encouraging questions. We want you to ask questions. I have a list of questions that you can ask. Is it better to have 2 states first? Wouldn't one state make more sense? Is it realistic to separate religion from government in the Middle East? Is this proposal is to dismantle the Jewish state? What gives this government legitimacy? What would Israel allow this to happen? Is there a precedent for this? Could people from Hamas run? What would give this government teeth? Many, many other questions. So please ask your questions. We encourage questions. This is a simulations, and in the simulation, we want you to accept these facts, that the Prime Minister of Israel represents Israelis only, because he's elected by Israelis only. Palestinian leaders represent Palestinians only. However, because this is a simulation, we want you to assume certain facts. These are the facts that we want you to assume. That we had an online election platform that was in place and people were able to vote in the last 3 months. That today was the end of the 3 months that we elected, that we allowed 14 million people to vote in Israel, the West Bank, and Gaza. That we want you to assume that 5 million people actually voted. The 3 million Palestinian voted and 2 million Israelis voted. That we also want you to assume that the president received 1.5 million votes. I also want you to assume that I, Joseph, was elected as president. Let me just tell you that I do not intend to run for president of the IPC. I'm not even qualified based on the Constitution to be the president. That I want you to assume that the vice president, a Palestinian lady, received 1.3 million votes. She will become president after I serve for 2 years, and I will become vice president after 2 years. I also want you to assume that 300 parliament members were elected. I'll ask most of you to act in this simulation as parliament member. That each parliament member represents a district of 47,000 people. These are the assumptions that I want you to assume. Professor Lustig, do you have any difficulty accepting those assumptions?
Unfortunately, I do, because if you ask me if I accepted the assumption in geometry of whether two parallel lines will never meet, I'd have to ask you, I'd say, well, in a Euclidean world, yes. But that's assuming there are only 3 dimensions. If there are 4 dimensions, actually, they can be.
I don't understand what you're saying.
What I'm saying is that your assumptions are based on on an ontology. When you say Israelis and Palestinians, as if you're either an Israeli or a Palestinian, but 20% of Israeli citizens are Palestinians. So if you have a vote, as I'm being asked to assume, where more votes, there are 3 million Palestinians voting and 2 million Israelis, I have to assume that of those 2 million Israelis voting, only 1.5 million of them are Jews. If that's the case, I don't understand how a Jew would win more votes and be president when there were 3.5 million Palestinians voting, Palestinian Arabs voting, and only 1.5 million Jews. So that's
right.
my problem.
This is a secular government. We don't really differentiate between religion. There are 14 million people in that area. An Israeli is someone that is holding an Israeli citizenship. A Palestinian is someone that is holding a Palestinian citizenship. So I don't really understand your issues with the assumptions.
Well,
Do
I'm
you-
not
Do you
going.
agree that there are 14 million people in there?
Yeah, actually more than that, but yes, but there are many people who aren't citizens of anything, for one thing. But Palestinians don't have in the West Bank and Gaza don't have passports, so I don't think they are citizens of any country. So, but the point is, I'm not talking about religion. I'm talking about
Palestinians are citizens of Palestine. They are recognized by the Palestinian government.
there's an assumption that there's one Palestinian government, that there's no Hamas, it's just Palestinian Authority ruling, and it's a government with citizens in Gaza and the West Bank.
Are you saying there are I don't really understand let me go line by line.
Okay.
Do you accept the fact that there are 14 million people in there?
There are actually more, but yes, I accept it.
Okay. Do you accept the assumption that 5 million people voted?
Okay, I will. I'll
Okay.
accept that.
Okay. So your issue is with the 3 million Palestinians?
No, my issue is that you are making an ontological assumption below these claims, which I can't accept, which is that the population is made up of Palestinians and Israelis, when it's really made up of Jews, Arabs, and non-Jewish non-Arabs. That's politically the important population. The citizenship of in East Jerusalem, for example, but you've got Palestinians who are not part of the Palestinian Authority, and they're not citizens of Israel. They can't vote. So if you're
but they can vote for the common government. There are people in Israel
would they be counted as
that are Jews, that are citizens of Israel. There are people in Israel that are Christians, that are citizens of Israel.
Yes.
And there are people in Israel that are Muslim, that are citizens of Israel.
Joseph, I understand. There are 330,000 Palestinian Arabs, Christians and Muslims living in expanded East Jerusalem. Almost none of them, very small number of them, are citizens of Israel. None of them are citizens of the Palestinian Authority, because the Palestinian Authority doesn't exercise control over them. So who would they be voting for if they're not Palestinians and they're not Israeli citizens? These are 330,000.
It really makes no difference who will they be voting for. It makes a difference that they are allowed to vote.
Do you count them as Israelis or Palestinians?
It makes no difference.
Oh, okay. Well, I can't, it's hard for me to accept the assumption. I don't know.
It makes no difference whether they are Israelis or Palestinians. For us, they're part of the 14 million people.
Yeah, but you said that would their districts be counted in the parliament? Would their representatives be counted in the parliament as, you know, part of the 55% you have to get to have your 55% Palestinians or 55% Israelis?
No, the districts will be divided based
Okay.
on mathematical, statistical, based on geography and population. It really makes no difference
I
whether
don't, I don't want to hold things up. That's
Yeah.
fine.
But, okay, now whoever, no, you're asking a good question. Now, whoever is elected is part of the 55%, not whoever votes. So a person, let's say in East Jerusalem, he represents himself to be a Palestinian and he wants to run as Palestinian. He will be counted as a Palestinian parliament member because that's how he represents himself. Okay?
Okay.
All right. Does anyone in the audience have any questions regarding the assumptions? Because the entire simulation is based on the acceptance of those assumptions. Okay, I believe those assumptions are very, very achievable. I just want to give you a comparison. 1 day of full-fledged war between Israel and Palestine cost over $100 million. With 1 day of war, these assumptions could become a reality. With $100 million, they could become a reality. The elections could be a reality. The logistic could be a reality, and the government could function for several years with 1 day of war, cost of 1 day of war between Israel and Palestine. Now, this is a simulation, so we are going to be asking you, the audience, to act either as Palestinian or Israeli parliament member, or we need to have some of you act as Israeli prime minister, Hamas leader, and PA leader. So first I need volunteers. I need a volunteer for PA leader, Palestinian Authority. Do I have a volunteer to be a Palestinian Authority leader? Please, I need volunteers. This is part of the simulation. Do I have a volunteer to be a Palestinian Authority leader? I also need Hamas leader, and I need a Israeli prime minister prime minister.
I'll do Israeli Prime Minister, Len.
Okay, Len, you've been before. I have no problem with you being again, but I want you to understand that you are not Len now. You are Yair Lapid.
That's right.
That means that you have a very, very flimsy coalition of 60 Knesset members. Some of your Knesset members are on the left, and some of your Knesset members are Arab Israelis, Palestinian Arab Israelis, okay?
Right.
They could make your government fall altogether, okay? So
There's going to be an election in a month, so I won't be there anymore.
well, does that mean that you're now taking a suicidal stand, or what does it mean?
Means nothing. It means there's going to be another election, and
Okay,
maybe a new.
but
I'm here now.
Yeah, but you are Yair Lapid with a very flimsy coalition. You have to take that into consideration. You cannot act as Len. Okay, so we have Len as the prime minister. Do I have a Hamas leader?
I'll do something, Joe.
Okay. Who is that? I'm sorry.
Jeff.
Oh, Jeff? Okay, I don't see. Okay, Jeff, would you be Hamas leader?
Whatever you want.
Yes, I want you to be Hamas leader. You're good Hamas leader. And
I could do one if no one else volunteers.
oh, Jesse?
Yes.
Terrific. You'll be a PA leader. Okay, great.
Oh, sounds good.
Okay, the rest of you, I'm asking you to be either Israeli or Palestinian parliament members, okay? So I'm showing you a map of Israel, Palestine. you need to choose where, you need to be intellectually honest. You'll be Israeli or Palestinian. You need to decide what is your area, because I may ask you, what is your district you represent? So I am going to, we need now to have the Palestinian parliament members just vote yes, so we know how many Palestinians we have, Palestinian parliament members. Okay, so we have 10 Palestinian parliament members. And let's have the Israeli parliament members. Please vote. Okay, we have 6 Israeli parliament members. All right. So remember what district you represent, and your district could be mixed, Israelis and Palestinian together, not necessarily. So this goes to the question that Professor Lustig asked. It really makes no difference who your constituents are. It makes a difference who you are, who you recognize, who you identified yourself as, either Israeli or Palestinian, as a parliament member. Okay. So now we're going to the first order of business, and that's the Constitution. Libby, could you, and now we put the whole thing on one page. So Libby, could you please read the Constitution?
We believe that Palestinians and Israelis are entitled to equal rights under the law and guaranteed human rights and freedom. The Israeli-Palestinian Confederation does not intend to supersede or supplant the Palestinian or Israeli governments, nor to abrogate or undermine any agreements between those governments. We recognize the need to work with the Israeli and Palestinian governments. Our purpose is to resolve conflicts and to expand the relationship between Palestinians and Israelis in a fair and equitable manner. We believe in equal rights under the law, guaranteed human rights, and freedom for all. We voluntarily give the legislatures and the governments of Israel and Palestine veto power over legislation we pass relating to the domain of control of those governments. We believe in the separation of power between the legislative, executive, and judicial branches. We believe in the creation of a permanent secular government for all the people residing in Israel and Palestine. We believe in having a separate judicial branch relating to IPC legislation with Israeli and Palestinian judges, with a system to avoid biased decisions based on nationality.
All right, thank you. So the important part is that we are a separate government. We do not intend to supersede or supplant. In other words, whatever the Israeli and the Palestinian governments agree between themselves, constitutionally, we are prohibited from interfering. They could agree to 2 states, 1 state, whatever they want to agree. Constitutionally, we are unable to undermine their agreement. We accept those agreements. And the second important part is that whenever we pass legislation that affects the sovereignty of Israel or Palestine, we give them a veto power. This gives them a safety net. Does anyone have any question regarding the Constitution? Professor Lustig, do you have any questions?
When you say affects sovereignty, what do you mean by sovereignty specifically?
If we cannot implement the legislation without your consent, that means that that part of the legislation, that part of life is under your sovereignty. if you can block us from implementing the legislation, that means you have sovereignty.
So sovereignty is control of anything.
Yeah, if you have control over it and we need your favor, we need to beg you to allow us to implement our legislation, then we give you a veto power.
So can you give me an example of something that would definitely not be interpreted by either the Palestinians or the Israeli governments as infringing their sovereignty?
Yeah, if we want to pass a budget, if we want to, that our budget does not affect your sovereignty. Our constitution does not affect your sovereignty. We don't need your.
Okay, so budget include taxes? You're going to tax the population?
No,
Because
but budget does not include taxes.
Oh.
Our budget,
Okay,
our budget.
wow.
If we want to pass a constitution, we don't need your permission. If we want to fire, if we want to impeach the president or a parliament member, we don't
Okay.
need your permission. We can
So-
do it without your permission.
Okay, so for the audience's benefit, from a political science point of view, what you are proposing here is that you're going to establish a very, very large club. And this private club can't do anything that is forbidden by either the Israeli government or the Palestinian Authority. But within this club, you can take measures to rule yourselves. And if anything you decide that is not objected to by the governments, you can do. But that's what this actually is. It's not a government, it's a big club that is open to everyone who lives between the Jordan and the sea.
Well, I disagree. It is a government. We have been elected by 5 million people, more votes than the Israeli or the Palestinian governments even put together, maybe. We are, and we specifically chose the word government in order to give us authority. If that's how it's defined if it's not how defined by political science, then what I suggest is that political science will change its definition. But we are a government.
Okay.
All right. So any other questions? Okay, having no question, let's take a vote. Let's have the Palestinian parliament members please vote on this constitution to ratify the constitution. We have 10 parliament member Palestinian. I only see 9 votes. Okay, actually we have 11, 12, perfect. Okay, 12 Palestinian parliament members voted yes. And the way the Israeli and the Palestinian heads of government are not allowed to vote. You are a different government. You cannot vote. All right, let's go to the Israeli parliament members. Okay, we have 6 Israeli parliament members. Only 5 voted. We need to have. What about the 6th one? Is he left the room or hiding or not willing to vote? Okay, so, all right, let's publish the vote. 100%, the 6th one has not voted. I don't know why, but let's give him the benefit of a doubt. All right. So we have a constitution, we have a government, we have a parliament, and now we're going to the first order of business. And that is, well, before we do that, I just want to respond to a possible objection. Would Israel allow this to happen? Would the Palestinians allow that to happen? They don't have a reason to object. They cannot articulate a reason to object. And then it's to the question of would Israelis or Palestinians support this? They are not a monolithic system. Some Israelis will, some Palestinians will. And the beauty of this is that it puts those Israelis and those Palestinians who agree, it puts them together to create a huge political system. The Israeli and the Palestinian governments do not have the legal authority to object. They don't have the moral authority to object, and they may lose legitimacy if they try to object, and they never attempted to disrupt before. Now, we did have these elections before. We had a full-page ad in the New York Times. This is not a simulated fact. This is a real fact. We had a full-page ad in the New York Times, and we did not get any objection from the Israeli about an election that took place on December 12, 2012. And we actually had the election. Not many people participated, but we divided the whole area into 300 districts. We had many parliament members vote and president putting themselves for a vote. It did not go very well because there was no awareness in the Israeli or the Palestinian community for this. All right, first order of business is granting a veto power to the separate governments. So we are the parliament. We're now going to take a vote. And Libby, could you please read this legislation?
The Confederation is the government of the entire population of Israel, the West Bank, and Gaza. We hereby bestow a veto power relating to legislation affecting sovereignty to the following: the government of Israel, the Palestinian Authority, and Hamas. In the event of changes in governments, this legislation may be amended or repealed.
All right, so Professor Lustig, I think this answers your question about sovereignty and about sovereignty. Do you have any questions about this legislation?
Yes. So if we go back to the previous point you made, that Israel and Palestine would have no reason or no ability to object, insofar as you actually are claiming authority, governmental authority, that would be interpreted as a challenge not just to the government, but to the regime. There is a difference between a government. We have governments change all the time in Israel and in other countries, different prime ministers, different presidents, different cabinets, but the regime, the system of authorized rules for making decisions, raising taxes and so on, that regime is what does or does not have legitimacy. And both of those could very well see an assertion that this large club is advancing itself as a government, as a threat to their, if you don't want to call it sovereignty, it's a threat to their integrity as a regime, their legal authority. And when the Geneva Initiative people did something like this without elections, but they launched a people-to-people negotiating program, which sought to make peace without doing it through the governments, they were challenged by the government of Israel as illegitimate. And that was Ariel Sharon, among others, who denounced the effort as traitorous. So I think we would expect at least the government of Israel, certainly Hamas, probably
what is the legal authority? What legal authority does the Israeli government have to challenge this election? What is the specific statutes?
Whatever they have authority, they have banned other organizations that they felt were a threat to the regime. Going back to El Ard, for example, in the 1950s. And
I know, but what is their legal authority? And we're not in the 1960s. We are in 2024.
I agree with you. that this is, I'm suggesting it would be interpreted, if this were serious, that a club is announcing itself to be a government, is using the term memshalah in Hebrew, or that would be considered a political threat and would be denounced. Whether it would be
Okay,
prosecuted under law, I can't say.
Okay, what is the political threat? What is the threat?
Well, that even if you're not claiming to have the ability to tax, for example, or to change the status of land, or to negotiate with foreign powers, a foreign policy of the government, or to control or to guide or plan the use of infrastructural or national resources like land and water, energy, that potential is implicit in the claim that you're a government of all people from the Jordan to the sea. That
Yeah,
would
but
be rational.
we specifically give a veto power to the Israeli and the Palestinian government. So what is the threat?
I'm saying that technically, yes, you are giving a veto power. That would mean that it could do virtually nothing. But if it was a,
So if we can do nothing, then what is the threat?
I'm suggesting that it would be interpreted. It wasn't, as you pointed out, when the New York Times advertisement was put forward, it wasn't interpreted as a threat. It wasn't taken seriously. Once it becomes taken seriously, if it became very successful, it would be interpreted as a threat.
I know, but they don't have the legal authority. There is no statute that prohibit the people of Israel and Palestine organizing together as a separate government. There is nothing in the books that says that. And we give them a veto power. So what I said is that they do not have a legitimate way to articulate a legitimate reason. They can just put forward a salad of words, but not real political, clear argument why this is a threat. In fact, it gives them a veto power. It has no threat whatsoever.
Okay,
All
I think you and I have made our points as clearly as we can.
Okay, let's take a vote. Do the people in the audience have questions regarding this veto power? Okay, let's take a vote. Let's have the Palestinian parliament members please vote. Okay, publish the vote. 83% voted yes of the Palestinian parliament members. Let's go to the Israeli parliament members. Please vote. Okay, let's publish the vote. 100% of the Israeli parliament members voted, so we agree to give a veto power to these three entities. And let's go to the next legislation, which is teaching tolerance and understanding. Libby, could you please read this legislation?
Both educational systems to teach tolerance in their public schools. Devote a certain number of hours for both sides to teach the history of the Israelis and the Palestinians. Prioritizing teaching Arabic and Hebrew in public schools to achieve proficiency of both languages by Israeli and Palestinian students. Create a mutual task force to ensure the teaching of both languages. Educators to draft textbooks together and arrange for a regular exchange of teachers. Public media on both sides to provide fair and equal coverage daily for teaching tolerance. IPC as facilitator to ensure that both sides are fairly represented. And we hereby submit this legislation to the Israeli government, the Palestinian government, and Hamas, and we bestow upon them a veto power which may be exercised in the next 60 days.
All right, Professor Lustig, do you have any questions regarding this legislation?
No, I'd love to see these policies in place. In the early 90s, the Israeli government, which had Shulamit Aloni and Yossi Sarid running education and culture, these were actually more or less adopted. But as soon as as that government fell and more right-wing governments came into power, they were not only abandoned but reversed, and therefore I think this would be vetoed. But I see no reason why an organization like the one that we're simulating setting up shouldn't propose it.
Yeah, but the Shulamit Aloni and Yossi Sarid, they represented the Israeli government. We
That's
are
right.
representing the entire area, not the Israeli government, the
Well, I
entire area,
understand.
Israel, the West Bank, and Gaza.
No, I understand. I'm just pointing out to folks that actually the Israeli government itself more or less put this forward when it was one particular centrist dovish government. Once that government was replaced, governments have come into power which would avail themselves of the veto that you are giving them, so that even if this were passed by our simulated organization here, it would be vetoed by the Israeli government.
All right, let's have, do the people in the audience have any questions regarding this legislation? Let's have the Palestinian parliament member vote on this legislation. Okay, the number is depleting every time, but let's publish the vote. 10 out of 10 voted yes. 100% of the Palestinian parliament members voted yes. Let's go to the Israeli parliament members. Please vote. Okay, publish the vote. 100% of the Israeli parliament members voted in favor of this legislation. Let's go to the Hamas leader. Mr. Hamas leader, are you going to veto this legislation?
No, I will not.
Okay, let's go to the Israeli prime minister. Mr. Lapid, are you going to veto this legislation?
Yes. I
You
think
are.
yes, I find it's too comprehensive. There are many things I like. There's certain things that are not going to possibly work. And so,
Like what? Which one you not like?
okay, teaching the history of Israelis and Palestinians. They have completely different histories right now that they're teaching their students. And I don't see either of them teaching the other side's history. I like teaching tolerance. That's important. Hebrew and Arabic is important. Teaching of both languages is great. Textbooks together, if they're in non-political areas, fine. Public media to provide fair and equal coverage, that's an impossibility. You can't even get that in any country in the world. The media.
Okay, Mr. Prime Minister, are you aware that there are 10 left-leaning Knesset members in your government? 6 of them are Arab Palestinian.
I'm left-leaning myself.
You say you're left-leaning,
Yes,
but the Arab Palestinians in your government could demolish your government altogether.
Fine, that's why we have democracies. I have no problem with that.
Okay,
I'm giving.
You see, Len, you're
listen.
really acting like Len, because Israeli prime minister would not say fine. Would not say fine if he's the prime minister. He would not say fine. Let my government.
Israel is a democracy.
I know.
When the people aren't happy, they change the government.
No,
it's not Len.
Len, you're really being Len. You're not being the prime minister. You're not acting. You do not take the political consideration of a prime minister into consideration.
I just said
You're
at the
just
UN that I
Just
wanted.
acting as
to-
Len, you're not acting. All right,
Well,
let's go to
don't
the.
tell me who I'm acting like.
I
you're not
am
respect-
telling you because you're not, how do you take into consideration the fact that you have, that I am the president, I'm going to put pressure on the Palestinian parliament, a Palestinian Knesset member.
Okay,
And
are
I'm
you,
going
are
to
you,
say-
are you gonna put in history books that all the Palestinians in Judea and Samaria, in their history books, to say that no Arab was ever called a Palestinian before the KGB formed the PLO in 1964? Will you put that in the books? It's just too complicated to do.
We are not here to talk about the actual book. We are, whatever the Palestinians feel that their history is, we will teach that. Whatever the Israelis feel their history is, we will teach that. We're not going to combine the history. We're
Okay,
not,
well, you're talking about drafting textbooks. That means you either say A or B.
no, that
Okay.
doesn't say A or B. It basically could be A and B.
I think we have to simulate that it's been vetoed. Even perhaps Len is considering the reaction of the right wing of his coalition, who would be even faster to leave if this legislation were carried.
I'm not looking at the political situation from my problem as a member or as a prime minister.
Okay, yeah. All right, let's go to the PA leader. Mr. PA leader, are you gonna veto this legislation?
No.
Okay. So, thank you. I am, as the president, I'm going to put pressure on you, Prime Minister. I am going to put pressure internationally. I'm going to expose you as someone who doesn't want peace, because this legislation has been accepted by the Hamas leader, by the PA leader. It makes, and 100% of the parliament members voted for it, and you're the only one against it. So I will be, unfortunately, have to work in order to remove you and put pressure on your Knesset to remove you as Prime Minister. Let's go.
I respect your powers.
Joseph, let me ask you a question.
Yes, sir.
Why didn't you challenge the Hamas leader and ask him, wasn't he afraid that the people in his coalition?
Because he voted, he did not veto this.
I know it, but why didn't you?
Why would I
ask him?
challenge him?
No, I'm saying that analytically, the question you asked the Israeli prime minister is, how could you go against such a powerful group of people in your coalition?
Right.
And I'm asking, why didn't you ask that same question of the Hamas leader?
Because I don't have to. I don't have to. He agreed with this legislation.
I know, but we are in a simulation. We have to ask ourselves, why would the Hamas leader actually
No,
agree?
I don't have to ask. That we are simulating how this common government will work. I don't have to embarrass a leader just for the purpose of embarrassing him. If it works in my favor, it works for my consideration is the people of Israel and Palestine, 14 million people.
Okay.
Why would I go and embarrass the Hamas leader when he agrees with me? What's the point? Just so that I will look fair to the Israelis? That's not my issue at all.
Would it be possible for a parliament member to put forward an alternative, since there was only one sticking point majorly with the Israeli leader, that we could put through a revised teaching tolerance and understanding initiative that would also include cooperation, establishment of a committee to review the possibility of creating a textbook that would contain both the A and B histories, but leave that as a separate issue.
Okay, good point. Mr. Israeli Prime Minister, will you agree to that?
Sure, then this isn't being taken as it is laid out right now. People are going to look at it and bring forward suggestions. Sure.
Okay, so So thank you. So we passed this legislation, I assume. All right. This is for the purposes of demonstration only. All right. Let's go to the next issue, and that's a common police force. Libby, would you be so kind as to read this legislation?
Equal number of Israeli and Palestinians at each level. Distinct uniforms for the common police force different from the Israeli or Palestinian police force. Independent of the Israeli and Palestinian security forces. In cooperation with the separate Israeli and Palestinian authorities. Address sensitive religious, cultural, and language requirements. Facilitate the operation of the joint economic zones. Investigate corruption by administrators who refuse to teach tolerance. Investigate allegations of intolerance and racist hate crime against Israelis or Palestinians. Assist in managing checkpoints. Guard the Parliament building and threats against members of the Confederation. Facilitate access to and safety of religious facilities. And we submit this legislation to the Israeli government, the Palestinian government, and Hamas, and bestow upon them a veto power, which may be exercised in the next 60 days.
All right, and I apologize for the typo. I'll fix it later. Professor Lustig, do you have any questions regarding this legislation?
The assist in managing checkpoints. The international community has tried many times to do comparable things. Israel has never agreed to any such joint management of checkpoints. I
apologize, but that's not comparable. We are a common government, Israelis and Palestinians. We are this is not similar to the international forces.
No, it's similar only in that you have argued that an Israeli government would be afraid of seeming to be irrational or illegitimate if it refused requests like this.
No, it's not, because we have 5 million people voting. We have 300 parliament members voting. It's not similar at all.
Okay.
All right. Any other questions? All right. Let's take a vote. Palestinian Hamas leader, Mr. Hamas leader, are you? Oh, I'm sorry. Before Palestinian parliament members, please vote. Do you support an Israeli-Palestinian Confederation police force? Okay. Publish the vote. 10 out of 10, 100% of the Palestinian parliament members voted yes. Let's have the Israeli parliament members vote. Okay, let's publish the vote. 100% of the Israeli parliament members voted yes. Mr. Hamas leader, are you going to veto this legislation?
Well, it's I don't think so, but it's not at all clear that this joint police force does not come within my own territory, providing that that's perfectly clear that they don't come into my territory. In other words, into the Gaza Strip. I support this legislation because right now the checkpoints are controlled by Israel, and having the checkpoints controlled by this common government is clearly a positive step. So Hamas leader accepts this legislation.
Yeah, it says here in cooperation with the separate Israeli and Palestinian Authority. All right, let's have the Prime Minister of Israel. Are you going to veto this legislation?
As the professor said, yes, I will veto it.
And is there you veto the whole legislation, or is there?
Yes, I think there is no necessity for it. I mean, you heard Hamas say that these people aren't going into Gaza. Well, then they can't go into Israel. I mean, by the same token. So
But-
he doesn't really accept it.
Okay, but you understand that there is violence every day for the last several years in those checkpoints, and you are not able to control them.
Well, I could control them. If
You
I
could, but
create-
you don't. You
Okay.
could is different than actually do it. Okay? And
There is a PA police force now. I've met with PA officers in Bethlehem. I've talked to them. We had nice conversations. There are Israeli police forces. I don't think we need more police forces. I don't know who polices Gaza. But I don't think there's any requirement for a third level of police force. And I agreed with the professor on that point.
okay, well, the professor did not say there is no need. The professor said that Israel did not accept a common, a international intervention. So that's different. But I'm glad that we have an election in a month, and going to work hard that you will never be elected again. John Mitchell raised her.
You know, you may get thrown out too.
I may, but I've been elected now as
Yeah,
of
but
today
you-
for two
but-
years. I'm going to be president for 2 years.
So tell me something, are you gonna be like the PA and have elections and don't have re-elections for 15 years? Is that how you're gonna stay in power?
No,
Oh,
no, we
okay.
have a constitution.
Ah,
We have a common democracy. We have parliament. We have, I am in the
I know,
executive branch.
I know what you have, but I'm not having anybody.
You just
Yeah.
want to humiliate us because you have.
No, I don't. I
Yeah,
don't.
well, then why did you make that comment? Okay, let's go to John Mitchell. What's your question?
Well, given the police and army support of the crimes committed by various settler groups, the creation of a Palestinian police force would, in effect, defend the Palestinians. But my question goes back to the issue of checkpoints. I think this would be a major motion to be moved at the executive level between the Israeli and Palestinian parliaments, because if the
What is your question, John?
well, okay, if the Confederation is going to succeed, would you agree that one of the major legislations that should be moved is one is to disassemble or to do away with checkpoints?
Are you asking, isn't it better to remove the checkpoints altogether?
Yeah,
Yeah, I agree. It is better, but we are dealing with what's best under the condition, not what's perfect. Perfection is the enemy of good. We want, and we have to accommodate both sides, the Israelis and the Palestinian side. So you see how hard it is to put a common police force in a checkpoint. It would be 10 times harder to tell the Israelis to remove the checkpoints altogether, although I am in favor of that. Let's go to the PA leader. Mr. PA leader, are you going to veto this legislation?
No.
Okay, yeah, so that gives me a lot of political ammunition to help remove the Israeli prime minister, because I have the 300 parliament members voted in favor of this. The people of Israel and Palestine want this. The Hamas leader agreed with it. The PA leader agreed with it. It's not going to affect the security of Israel at all. And I'm going to work hard to remove the Israeli and prime minister and work hard against him. Charles, what's your question?
In previous simulations, the same Yair Lapid, being played by Lem, has agreed to a modified police force resolution. I forget exactly what the alterations were that he wanted, but I do seem to recall that there There were some suggestions made, and we did make those alterations, and he agreed to it on kind of a very limited basis so that it was policing basically the IPC. I'm not sure how much, whether it had any,
You sure you're not confusing the joint economic zone?
well, yeah, I think it was policing the joint economic zone. So there it was acceptable. And within the IPC, it was acceptable.
Okay, look, the prime minister is now under a lot of pressure. He wants to be elected. He's taking a harder line.
Okay.
Going to the next legislation. Libby, could you please read this legislation?
So this is taxation alliance between the Israeli and Palestinian governments with the IPC. The introduction. For the first time in history, the people of this region formed a mutual constitution and elected a secular democracy with enormous benefits to the people of Israel and Palestine, as well as their governments, by providing peace, security, economic opportunities, and substantial reduction in governmental operating costs. Therefore, the IPC is proposing the following legislation. We hereby request the Israeli and Palestinian government provides the following tax reductions to their taxpayers and subsidies to the IPC. All taxpayers obligated to the Israeli or Palestinian governments who opt in shall receive a 3% deduction in their taxes and an additional 3% of their taxes to be paid directly to the IPC. This legislation is submitted to the Israeli and Palestinian governments to exercise their veto power in the next 60 days.
So basically, we are proposing that for those Israelis and Palestinians who opt in, they will be getting 3% reduction in their taxes, and 3% of their taxes will come to us in order to facilitate our activities. Does anyone have any questions regarding this legislation? Professor Lustig, do you have any questions?
Well, I have a comment, which is this is disingenuous in the following sense. I earlier said that governments, politicians are not stupid. They look ahead. And I suggested that they would look ahead to the possibility that this organization would become successful. If it became successful, I suggested earlier that it would claim a portion of the tax base and that it would be in a position to try to humiliate or harm the political prospects of the leadership. You have repeatedly shown as president that you are capable of and willing to humiliate and hurt presidents or prime ministers of either the PA or of the Israeli government. And now you're showing that if successful, you would take part of the tax base. So what I said earlier is we should expect that from the very beginning, regardless of what you say, that the dynamic of a successful movement would threaten the existing governments, and they would see it and would fight against it.
All right, our purpose is to make peace. And I don't think that it is, there's nothing wrong with humiliating a government that for 74 years have not been able to make peace. And then maybe it's about time that they will be humiliated.
I completely agree.
Okay, so
what
are they gonna say? Hey, we don't want to be humiliated?
What to say from the beginning that, listen, politicians don't say what they really think. They say what will work.
Okay, but what would they say?
What they say, what I said earlier, if this became a potent movement, even before the Constituent Assembly or the legislature met to approve the Constitution, the authorities, Hamas, the PA, and the Israeli government would prevent it from happening.
I know, but what would be their argument?
Because they would say it is actually a threat. It is an alternative to our sovereignty.
How?
Because eventually it will try to tax our people, and it will prevent us from operating the way we want to.
I know, but they are given a veto power.
No, they're not. You are showing repeatedly that they will pay high costs for exercising that veto.
Yes.
And so, all right. So I'm trying to make a point that's, I think.
No, they will pay a high cost. I agree. But the high cost is for peace. It's not the high cost. Their individual survival as government is not the issue. The issue is peace. And there has to be a political powerhouse that will push them to make peace. All right, I think we made the point. Let's have a vote on this. Palestinian parliament members, please vote. Okay, let's publish the vote. 91% of the Palestinian parliament members voted yes. Let's have the Israeli parliament members vote. Let's end the polling, publish the vote. 83% of the Israeli parliament members voted yes. So all the legislation have been passed. Let's go to the Hamas leader. Mr. Hamas leader, are you going to veto this legislation?
Yes, I am. At this time, I'm open to, Hamas is open to having the IPC help us get towards peace. But at this time, this proposal would lose or take 6% of our budget, and that will undermine the Hamas social services. Before Hamas will accept this, the IPC must demonstrate that the benefits it provides will exceed the 6% loss to our income. So until that is somehow, and I understand this is going to be very difficult to do without the money, but until those benefits are clear, we have to veto this legislation.
Yeah, but are you aware, first of all, like you said, we are actually reducing your expenses by giving peace to your people and increasing the economy, having a joint economic zone, having an international airport. We need to operate somehow. And you're also aware that actually you will be benefiting a lot more from this legislation because the taxes that we will receive, you have 70% unemployment in Gaza, in the area that you control. So
Hamas understands that, and Hamas does want the IPC to succeed, but Hamas can't take the chance of fronting this money. Hamas is too poor. It spends a lot of its money on its social services, and it doesn't want the social services to disappear until the IPC can demonstrate it really can provide these more than 6%, more benefits than the 6% loss in the income would do.
Okay,
so at
now,
this point, we have to veto this.
What if we pass legislation to create a joint economic zone between Israel and Gaza with an international airport, with an international seaport, and we need money for that? Would you be willing to pass this legislation if we pass this legislation for a joint economic zone?
We would support those things, but we cannot afford to front the money for those kinds of efforts.
Okay.
They have to appear first before we can go forward.
All right. So what we will try to do is, like we've tried before, is we try to get
Hamas is
money from the international
following Ian
community.
Lustig's. Hamas is basically following Ian Lustig's worry.
Okay, let's go to the PA leader.
I veto the legislation. PA is running on a structural deficit. I veto the legislation.
Okay, and the Israeli Prime Minister.
The IPC needs money to operate, so obviously we have no problem with this. I understand the problem that Hamas has because they are basically surviving on welfare and they never know how much money is coming in. Plus, if we talk, plus we know that that the Hamas and PA leadership take a lot of graft. So it's very complicated for them. It's a lot easier for me. And
What about you? Are you vetoing this?
No, I accept it.
You accept it? Okay, great.
Yes.
Now, let me ask you this. Will you accept this legislation to apply only to the Israeli government? And then if we are able to prove that we reduced the expenses for your government and the Hamas government, and then we will ask the Hamas government and the PA to contribute their 3%. Will you agree to that? Actually, they're 6%.
Well, I think they have to contribute to your operations the same as I do.
Yeah,
I mean,
know.
I'm not arguing with the legislation. You're now asking me whether they should be excused. No, they should not be excused. They can spend a little less on building tunnels. They have plenty of money.
All right.
No,
But
they're.
okay.
I do not excuse them. If you excuse them, then you're on your own collecting money. I accept this legislation. You need a budget. You need to live. You want 3% of my taxes right today, fine. If I have to raise taxes or lower taxes at a future date, I'll do that. It's not your responsibility. I'm willing to give you this money that you're asking for. I have no problem.
Okay. Charles, let's wait.
Honestly, I object to the way the Israeli Prime Minister talks and claims that Hamas is full of corruption. He should look in his own backyard.
Well, some of his people in the backyard are in jail, so it's hard to. Okay, let's take a post-simulation survey after and then we'll go to question and answer. After participating in the simulation, do you support a common government for the people of Israel and Palestine? Survey question. This is for everyone, not Israelis, everyone. Okay, so this time we have, okay, let's give it a little bit more time for people to vote. Okay, and the polling. Okay, so this time 19 out of 22, 86% voted yes, and 3 out of 22 voted no, which is 14%. Actually, there is a reduction in the support. At the beginning, we had 88%, now 86% voted in favor of the common government. So I don't know if more people came in or what, but or more people were convinced. So I'm going to end the my sharing, and we'll go to an open discussion and have Professor LUSTICK give his opinion. Your general impression, Professor LUSTICK.
Yes, I want to emphasize that although you heard me raise very specific and maybe annoyingly specific problems with this particular proposal, which is, in my view, unprecedented. That is, I don't know of a case where anything like this has happened successfully. I do fundamentally agree with 3 basic elements of the proposal. Number 1, embedded in Joseph Avisar's approach here is the idea that the appropriate unit of analysis politically is the entire land and the entire population between the river and the sea. the political future of the will be determined by that entire population, demographically, culturally, politically. And any serious attempt to try to improve the situation means thinking of all the population, not just focusing on inside the West Bank, inside of Israel, Green Line, and so on. So I completely agree with that element of this. Another principle I agree with that is implicit in this approach is that we cannot and should not rely on negotiations between Israel and the Palestinian Authority to produce anything of use. Because that is a charade, what goes on when they talk about a peace process. There's a charade protecting the vested interests of those in power, both inside of Israel and in the PA, and we might also say in Gaza. So I completely agree with that as well. I also agree with the principle embedded here that all the people who live between the river and the sea should be treated as equals. Those three principles are captured here. What I disagree with is that and therefore, I actually think that this kind of initiative is very positive, even though I think it can't, as a specific plan, go anywhere. The time frame of change that I think about, in which I talk about this in my book, is not like, okay, next week we'll have another advertisement in the New York Times. 3 months from now, we'll have an election. And no, we're talking about generations of political struggle before coalitions between and among Palestinians in the West Bank, Palestinians inside of Israel, Palestinians and Jews in Jerusalem, Jews in the Negev, Palestinians in Gaza. Different shifting coalitions form, and the country changes as a result. Just as in the United States, it took generations for the Democratic Party, that was the party of Jim Crow, to end up being the party that relies on Black voters to produce a Black president. No one, okay, that's the kind of change that we have to see in Israel-Palestine, and it will take generations of political struggle. This is an initiative based on the correct basic principles. And that's why I'm excited about it, even though I can't have any confidence that any particular proposal like this will succeed right now.
Thank you. Did you say you are excited about it?
Yes, I like all initiatives that look at the problem and say, what are our values? How should we respond to a particular outrage or a particular opportunity based on our values? Nobody, including me, can have a plan as to how to get to peace, to a just peace. Because of that, there are no solutions. A solution to a problem is when you have a plan, not just a pretty picture of the future, but a plan to get there. There is no such plan that I have heard anymore. There used to be one. The two-state solution was a possibility, not a probability, but a possibility, no longer. So we now are in a situation where we have to use our values, look at specific things that come up, and act on them. And in the long run, democracies, even partial democracies like Israel, can evolve to include those who have been excluded, as women were excluded for generations and then included because men competed with one another and needed women to vote for them to prevent being defeated. That's how Blacks in America also got integrated. That's how Catholics in Britain got the vote. And that's how Arabs inside of Israel are now gaining political power, because competing Jews need them so much. Democracy has a way of spreading, but it's very slow and takes a lot of struggle.
Let me ask you something. You said that it would be generations that they need to have time in order to grow into this kind of solution. That's my understanding.
It's a very sad truth, but comparatively speaking, when I look at other problems like this, that is the way democratization has occurred. If you have a dictatorship, as you did in so many Latin American countries, as you had in Eastern European countries, you can change those dictatorships overnight and they can become something like a democracy. But if you have a democratic system that's very partial, that excludes huge proportions of the population because they're women, because they're Black, because they're Arab, because they're Catholic, those kinds of those democratization in those systems takes much, much longer. It happens, but it takes much longer.
So my question to you is, can we flip this around? In other words, I argued that one day of war between Israel and Gaza is about a full-fledged war with missiles and counter missiles and all of that, is about $100 million a day. So could we force this solution on the people of Israel and Palestine by actually having the platform for the election, by actually having the election, by actually having like 1 year of preparation, 1 year, and then we actually have the election? Why not force them to rapidly get to that rather than wait for them to get to that?
I see no reason not to try. That even if the point is not to actually succeed, there are educational, cultural, precedent-setting opportunities. Those are long-term struggles, and I would fully support anything like that. I do have to remind you and those in the chat who have the feeling that the current situation is unsustainable. It is intolerable, therefore it will change, or that because it's too costly, it's irrationally costly, there's another way, therefore it will change. The world is mostly totally irrational in politics. War is always way more costly than it makes sense to wage. That politics is not about, it never has been determined by what is rational or cost effective. And it's a mistake to think that a situation can't continue because it feels unsustainable to you. It can definitely continue. It can even get much worse. What we must do is look at other in history and where have situations of protracted national conflict or protracted ethno-cultural conflict, how have they moved? They almost never get resolved, but how have they moved to better problems? Under what time frame? How is it achieved? What role do schemes like this play? What role do clever compromises play, or don't they play very much role at all? Is it demographic change that does it? Are there large wars? Are people shocked into a new way of thinking by descending into a vortex of violence? How do these, whether it's Sri Lanka, or it's Cyprus, or it's Ireland, or it's Nigeria, how do these things evolve? Those are questions that I suggest asking. And I have not heard Joseph or anyone say, well, what we are proposing worked in this case. It didn't work in that case, and the Israeli-Palestinian case is more like the cases in which this works, so we're going to do it. I don't know of a comparable case here for this kind of proposal. Doesn't mean it shouldn't be tried. It is comparable in the sense that bottom-up efforts to make peace are quite common. They very rarely have much of an effect, but I believe that now is the time for this kind of what's called in Gramscian terms, molecular change. Change at the low levels in the way people think, in the way they experience their surroundings. And this set of ideas can help do that.
All right, let's go to Len and then to Sean.
Thanks, Professor,
Charles.
Okay, thank you, Professor, for your input. I've enjoyed it. I have two questions. Firstly, the Palestinian Authority is the authority that Israel made the Oslo Accord with in the first place. Hamas pulled most of it away. So I think it's a big problem for having somebody for Israel to deal with. Hamas is considered to be a terrorist organization by almost everybody in the world. That's just theoretical. What would have happened if Hamas hadn't taken over in Gaza? But the real question I have is, the Jews and the Palestinians have not been able to make peace, and they're not going to under the present configuration. The only people that I feel can move these two peoples to a better solution are the Arabs, and starting primarily with the Arabs that are part of the Abraham Accord. They are the ones that have to influence the PA into making peace, and they can help set borders for whatever a two-state solution means.
Well, I think the Arabs made a large contribution several decades ago by proposing the Arab Peace Initiative, also known as the Saudi Initiative, which basically said Israel withdraws from the territories, there's an agreed upon solution to the refugee question, and we all recognize Israel and we make peace. Israel has never responded, ever officially responded to that peace initiative, which is still on the table. The issue with Hamas is that it actually did represent, it won a free and fair election in Gaza. The United States and the PA were very upset that they allowed that election. They tried to overthrow the results in a coup and were defeated by Hamas. If you think Hamas is a terrorist organization, which of course Israel calls it that, on the other hand, Israel deals with it all the time and relies on Hamas to control Gaza. Hamas is Israel's Arab department for the control of Gaza, and the PA is Israel's Arab department for Judea and Samaria. When I say that, I'm using the term Arab department the way it was used in the 1950s and 60s, when Israel had a military government inside of the country, in the Galilee and in the Negev, and Arab citizens, when they went to a ministry, had to go to an Arab department of the ministry run by a Jew, but with all Arab deputies. And all the paperwork was done through the Arab department. That is what the PA does. It's not a government of the Palestinians. It's a department of the Israeli government. That's the real political fact, not the formal political fact. That wasn't supposed to be what happened under Oslo, but Israel has only allowed certain formal aspects of Oslo to survive. Areas A, B, and C distinctions. In some ways survive, but Israel sends security forces whenever it wants into Area A, showing that it doesn't really believe Oslo exists anymore, except when it's convenient to say something like, well, the Palestinian Authority is the government of the Palestinians. So we have to make a distinction between what is said to be true and what's actually true.
Well, I think too, we have to recognize that under international law, Israel is everything from the river to the sea. That's international law. And what ruined Oslo was Arafat rejecting the Clinton plan back in 2000 and starting the Intifada.
Well, we should go offline. That's completely false.
Yeah.
But if it matters to you, that is, if you found that that was not true, hypothetically, if that would matter to you, I would be glad to interact with you in a sustained way. But would it matter to you if you found that that was not the case?
No, it wouldn't matter to me anything.
No,
you're missing what I'm saying. Where I'm saying is today, the only people that can influence this group are the Abraham Accord nations and the other Arab states, which are more and more working with Israel. They are the only influence. I think America is not an influence. The EU is not an influence. The Arab countries in the Middle East are the people that have to go in there and work with the Israelis and the Palestinians. That's all I'm saying is the only influence right now.
Well, yeah, I agree. In the long run, the Abraham Accords, which are basically a deal among dictatorships to protect one another. That's what it is. And it's based on America paying bribes to each of the Arab countries to go in and make a deal with Israel. This is what the Abraham Accords actually are, but they can have unintended consequences. They can set up relationships between the UAE and Morocco and Israel, which Israel may find in 10 years not so easy to break. They may find that there's a restraint that Israel has to exercise toward what it would otherwise do to Arabs in the West Bank and Gaza, because it doesn't want to risk ties with these governments, especially if those governments change down the road and become less dictatorial than they are now. So I see a lot of potential in that, but only over a very long time frame.
All right, let's go to Sean. And then Charles, and then Jesse.
Sean is muted.
Sean, you're muted. You need to unmute yourself. Sean, you need to unmute. Oh,
Okay, I got it. Hold on. Mr. Lustig, what you mentioned early about the veto power for PA and Israel should have happened in the 90s, but it has been overthrown by the Israeli government when it became more right-wing than before. And now if IPC comes into place, the Israeli will veto the IPC, which will not allow the IPC to intervene into the conflict. Yeah.
Yeah,
Like when you mentioned about that earlier in the 90s when it was about to happen, but it didn't.
Let me be clearer. What I was saying was that specific legislation about tolerance in education, common textbooks, which taught each history from a balanced point of view, and taught Palestinians things they didn't want to know about Zionists, and taught Zionists things they didn't want to know about Palestinians, about the Nakba, for example. Those were policies that Israeli governments for a couple of years adopted, even teaching the Holocaust very differently. All of it was thrown out and reversed by Israeli governments who became, and those are the Israeli governments we've had since then, much less tolerant of introducing balance of any kind into the curriculum. So therefore, I extrapolated from that to try to assess what would probably happen in the simulated world that we were creating.
Oh, okay. Okay. All right. Thanks.
You're
all
welcome.
right. Charles, please. You need to unmute.
Professor Lustig, I look at this in kind of like listening to you talk about how this has to be perhaps even a generational building of progressive political change, and yet there has to be some point of action in order for that to take place. And I look at the IPC as kind of a combination of two things, really. A push-pull and the shock doctrine. So, you know, ideas that come across sequentially, one after the other, even if they're rejected, do have the tendency to cause a person to think and to progressively lead them to a conclusion that they would not have arrived at otherwise. And then the shock doctrine, for example, in 2012, when that election was held for the IPC, that happened, the lead up to that election happened during another point of violence in Gaza. Another conflict and war in Gaza. So there was this thing that was like, you know, work to suppress it. But eventually, I think that has to flip. This kind of like ongoing painting yourself into a corner. There is no alternative. You know, the only thing we can do is hate each other. I mean, that has to be, as you said, it has to be unsustainable. So when that becomes unsustainable, if there are these other ideas floating around that people can latch onto, that to me is the point at which this is going to turn into something that actually becomes possible. It never becomes possible until suddenly it is. It's like when Obama changed his mind about gay people. right? And suddenly he was for marriage equality. Boom, overnight. And the country went along. And that's where we are now. And they're trying to turn the clock back, and I don't think they're going to succeed. So anyway, I just wanted to bring that up and get your reaction.
I agree with everything you just said, Charles. Let me tell you something else I'm doing this week that will shed light on this. I've been asked at Penn to do a talk at something that the Penn Students for Palestinian Justice or something at the law school wanted to do, and they wanted to call the event Anti-Zionism 101. And I said, look, it's like a teach-in, and I would be one of the panelists, and they would have JVP people and a lawyer. I said, sure, I don't really care as long as I can say what I want, but I don't think it's a great name. And so we talked about that, and I said, you know, Zionism, you're treating Zionism as if it's Israel. As if political state Zionism is all that Zionism was, but you have Zionism, which included Ahad Ha'am, Martin Buber, of cultural nationalism that didn't rely on a Jewish state or the oppression of Palestinians. And so their response was interesting. They went back and huddled and decided to change the name of the event to Unraveling Zionism. And one of the questions they are going to ask me, because they sent me the script, is why do you call yourself a Zionist? Why do you use the term when words have power and the power of that word is to oppress Palestinians? And here's what I wanted to explain. I will tell them, don't tell them because I want it to be a surprise, but I will tell them that I agree that words have power. And Zionism is a word we have to preserve to has a potentially positive meaning so that the Jews who will remain in a democratic Palestine, which are most of them, will be able to proudly call themselves Zionists because they are part of a large, prosperous, and secure Jewish community in the land of Israel, which is what Zionism was originally all about. If you get rid of the term Zionism, you don't offer Jews anything to be proud of in the eventual transformed country. So you see, Charles, I'm also agree that preserving certain ideas and creating them for the times that we can't predict and for the opportunities that will emerge is crucial. And that's why I support also, as you do, this kind of initiative. Let 100 flowers bloom.
All right, let's go to Charles. You want to ask more?
I had more. I want to converse with you on this, but I'm going to do it privately.
That's
so
fine.
Don't take up people's time.
You have my email address. It's easy to find.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Okay, let's go to Jesse and then Olivia.
Yeah, I guess my comment early on, you, Professor, you talked about, people that don't hold passports, and we brought up Jerusalem as an example of people that aren't in, that are in that Jordan to the sea, but don't have a Palestinian passport or Israeli passport. What about people that try to say this idea is not a good one because it doesn't include the stateless people that live in these so-called refugee camps in Syria or Lebanon, or Jordanian Palestinians that lost their citizenship decades ago? I guess it'd be like what, the enemy of the good is perfect. But
Right.
What about that real issue?
Okay, there's no harm in talking about large issues of justice. The two-state solution was largely based on the idea that those people would never get anything really. It would be a lottery in which some people would be able to return, okay? My own feeling in terms of my own values, since I'm not interested in, I better not talk about the refugee problem because that's bad for the two-state solution. No, there is no two-state solution, so I might as well talk about anything I want. And what I think there is that Jews and Palestinians should be treated exactly the same. And Jews should not be allowed to immigrate into the country unless they are in a country where Jews are oppressed. And the same thing for Palestinians, refugees. And but the opportunities should be equal. And that's how I would address that problem. Now, lotteries, compensation are all, compensation funds are all ways to approach this problem also. But my basic principles are there have to be the equality of all, that there have to be mutual respect of non-exclusivist national self-determination by Palestinians and Jews, and there has to be democracy. Those are my, sine qua nons, and I operate from those values. I look at specific question: what do we do about East Jerusalem Arabs? Should East Jerusalem Arabs vote in apply for Israeli citizenship and thereby accept the occupation and undermine the two-state solution? Or should they apply for Israeli citizenship and put pressure and vote in Jerusalem municipality elections to try to get a moderate mayor in Jerusalem that would make life easier for Palestinians and produce a political model of cooperation? I believe that in the latter, that East Jerusalem Arabs should be voting in municipal elections, which they have the right to do. The Palestinian Authority tells them not to and intimidates them out of it. The Israeli government also doesn't want them to do that. So that's the kind of situation in which I don't care about whether it's good or bad for negotiations. I just think, is it good or bad for my principles? Democracy, equality, and mutual respect for non-exclusivist national self-determination.
And the IPC meets all of your three requirements.
And I have expressed support for the idea. As you know, I don't think it is workable in its terms, but I think the general project is a positive thing.
All right, I think Jesse was really asking about, as I understand, correct me wrong, Jesse, you said why is the IPC excluding Palestinians that are outside the area, the Palestinian refugees? That, I think that's what you were asking, correct?
Correct.
Yeah.
Correct.
Okay,
Yeah.
so let me respond to that, because the IPC is a entity that is created by the people of Israel and Palestine. It's not a Palestinian organization. It's not an Israeli organization. It's for the people of Israel and Palestine. The refugees, the Palestinian refugees and the Jewish refugees that do not live in, or Israelis who do not live in the area, are not part of the Israeli, they're not allowed to vote in the Israeli system, and the refugees are not allowed to vote in the Hamas system or the Palestinian system. So there is nothing wrong with the Israelis and the Palestinians who live in that area creating a common government based for their own benefit. It does not contradict the rights of the Palestinian refugees at all. Now, they could vote later on what to do with the refugees or what to do with the other people, but this is an organization for the people of Israel and Palestine together.
It does raise the question of maybe 400,000 foreign workers and others who live in Israel who are not citizens and not Arabs and not Israelis. But we can leave that aside.
Under the Constitution, they have to be both residents and citizens. Okay.
I've pointed out the citizen problem.
Yeah, but I disagree. There is the Palestinians have identity cards with the Palestinian Authority, and there are some. Okay, let's go to Olivia.
You're muted, Olivia.
Olivia, you need to unmute yourself.
I'm so sorry. Well, first, I want to thank you so much for being with us, and thank our host, Joseph, and say hello to everybody. Right, we have a state. Can you hear me okay, Joseph? Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Yes?
Yes.
Yes, you can. Okay. We have a state that oppresses and humiliates and has been doing 5 million people, and another 1.8 million in Israel don't really feel as though they're treated like second-class citizens. And we know what happens through the killing in prison, the torture, all this. I don't wish to discuss that because we know it. We know what happens. It's appalling. And many people throughout the world point a finger at Israel and say, well, you're a modern society. You've got this wonderful technology. You've got brilliant people. You're clever, etc. What's going on? Okay, now my question to you, you are a US academic that has been studying Israel-Palestine for many decades. So I presume, I would imagine that you're familiar with your colleagues in Israel. And I live in Europe. Europe is a place where we have immense problems of all kinds, but there's a little but, a big but, we have debates. Now we have conferences, debates, discussions, roundtable discussions on television, in conference centers, in city halls, in big cities, small cities, everywhere, with panels, various different ways of organizing these debates. And people that are invited are intellectuals. It's a very broad category that means, academics like yourself, or artists, journalists, historians, clever people, politicians perhaps, lots of different people are invited. And it's surprising when you listen to many of these, and various issues are discussed. There might be one, there might be a series. There were some very famous debates in the UK, very famous debates that lasted for many years, every Thursday. One was called Question Time. It's excellent. Well, I don't want to, my question to you is this. You're obviously familiar with your colleagues in Israel and how Israeli society functions. Is it a place where there is debate? And if so, an obvious theme to debate would be this goddamn elephant in the room. Are they ignoring this elephant? How can you ignore an elephant in the room? If I had an elephant right in front of me now, it would be difficult to ignore him. So that's my question. I'm familiar with some Israeli historians, the ones who we hear in the English-speaking world, or in France, or in Germany, or in the UK, like Ilan Pappé, who's heard all over the world, like Avi Shlam, like Shlomo Sand, but that's just three. Now there are lots more, and you have lots and lots of academic connections. How do they behave? What's their role? Is there debate? Because debates could debates push things forward? Debates can help inform people, can help stimulate discussion. So that's my question to you, is how does Israeli society function as far as the debate thing goes? Thank you so much.
Very, very quickly, because I know we're short on time. You're absolutely right that there's a lot of debate on the outside, and debate is so important. What I don't, unfortunately, think that you're correct on is that elephants can't be ignored when they're in the room. The climate change has been taking place for 50 years. I just read that snow crabs are disappearing. We're not going to be
Sure.
So it's obvious that elephants can be ignored. And in Israel in particular, for those who know anything about American politics, Israel used to be a blue state. It used to be like Connecticut or New Jersey. And maybe in the 1980s, it was Ohio. It was, or Pennsylvania, kind of purple state. But it is now Oklahoma. It's Nebraska.
Yeah, sure.
Okay, it's Idaho. So you do have 10% of the Jewish population that thinks more or less the way we do. But they are, that includes about 70% of the academics. But they have no political power to speak of. Without, in the future, the only way that group can get power is once the West Bank and Gaza Palestinians get the vote. That's how, and eventually, I know it sounds nuts, but that is how moderate Zionists can come back into power. The current government is not a moderate government. It is controlled by the right. Even if it has a few leftists in it, it is very much controlled by the right, and so will the next government be controlled by the right. And one of the aspects of that control is to exclude discussion of Palestinian problem. It used to be in universities, you could find terrific work on the West Bank and Gaza and the effects of the occupation. Now you can't even find the word occupation in Israeli university courses. That's how, so now, that's why I talk in my book about the fact that there is wrong to see the area between the river and the sea as Israel and not Israel. It is all the state of Israel. in which certain regions are ruled under different rules than others, but it's one state. And that makes a huge difference for how you think about the future.
Yeah, is that because intellectuals are usually interested in a thing called truth, or plural truth. Do they toe the line because they need a salary, because the Israeli state pays them salary, and because they wouldn't get employed unless they toe the line?
First of all, you have right-wing intellectuals.
Unless they shut up, in other words.
There are such things as intellectuals who disagree with you about
about
what truth is.
Squabbling is healthy, Professor. Forgive me for interrupting you. Squabbling is healthy.
Yes, there's lots of right-wing intellectuals. They take their first principles are so foreign from ours, let's say, that communication is difficult. But I think you were right that many Israeli professors avoid, because of their paychecks, because they need grants, because a lot of the actually there are legal strings attached to money that academics get to go abroad or to go to conferences. They can't actually criticize Israeli policies without risking those grants. Those are a whole panoply of status and other problems that Israeli academics have that have helped to weed out discussion of the Palestinian problem.
So academic freedom is limited. Well, that's very serious. That's very serious.
In the press, you have Haaretz and then everything else. And although we may all read Haaretz, very few people in Israel read Haaretz, except those intellectuals that we're talking about.
Professor,
it's a sad situation, but thank you very much very much indeed.
How much time do we have with you?
I can be here another 15 minutes.
Okay, so let's do it quick. Let's have John ask the next question. And Len, do you have a question? Okay, so quick questions, please. John, Charles, Len, and then Professor, if you can show us your book, and then we'll have closing remarks.
Okay, a question for you, Joseph, and of course, the Professor. One of the essential issues concerning the establishment of the IPC or its existence concerns the Palestinian refugees in the surrounding Arab countries. Now, that for the Palestinian Parliament is absolutely crucial for them to get returned, whether to the West Bank or to Gaza or wherever in the general territories. That includes Israel as well. Now, one thing we're all sure of, 100%, is that under the IPC, Israel would implement its veto against any incoming of Palestinian refugees. So can you comment on that, please?
Yes, I think that's right. I think that if the Israeli government won't even allow the Palestinian spouses who live in the West Bank of Israeli citizens to move into Israel proper, then of course they're not going to agree to any proposal by the Confederation that would allow Palestinian refugees entering into the country. One of the most creative things that I've heard lately about refugees, which might be of interest to you and others, is if you look at the Gaza Strip, it is surrounded by territory that's almost empty. I don't mean just right around it. I mean an entire apron going up to Ashkelon and sweeping down of about 15 kilometers, if not more. It's empty. And most of that area is where Arabs used to live before 48. I mean, Ashkelon was called Majdos, was an Arab city. So there's no reason, you've got 2 million Arabs in Gaza, rapidly growing. The Trump plan was the first plan that imagined Palestinian refugees moving into what is now Israel. If you read it carefully, I mean, it was a crazy plan, completely ridiculous, and not what it said it was. But one of the most interesting parts of it, which no Israeli objected to, was that there was going to be a little strip of land along the border with Egypt in which Gaza residents would move to alleviate the density in Gaza. And those would be refugees. That was the first time that refugees, these living in Gaza, in other words, would be moving into Israel proper. I thought that was a precedent to be built on. It should be noticed and celebrated and used in future discussions.
What about you, Joseph?
Excuse me?
Joseph, could you answer that question with regard to the potential survival of the IPC with regard to Israel using its veto against the incoming of Palestinian refugees?
Well, I don't.
No,
I mean,
he wants me to respond, and I'll tell you very quickly. I disagree with the professor. I think that it all depends on how much political power this common government will have. If it has 5, 6, 7 million people vote, then the Israeli government is going to have a lot less power than the professor thinks, in my opinion.
If that's true, you know, there's a joke about a desert island where different professors are stuck and they end up having a can, and the physicist tries to figure out some very fancy machine that could be built to open the can, and the philosopher tries to think about how it really doesn't matter if it's open if we only believe it's open, but the economist has the solution. The economist says, just assume we have a can opener. So if we just assume that 5 million people vote for this, yes, there's a lot of political power, but it's, yeah, if my grandmother had wheels, she'd be an omnibus. You know, that I will live in a world in which I can't really depend on the assumptions being fulfilled that I would love to be fulfilled.
$100 million will make the assumption a reality. All right, let's go to.
Let's call George Soros.
I'm sorry?
Let's call George Soros.
Funny, you are the second speaker that mentioned him, but I think we can raise that money with social media.
Yes.
Let's go to Charles, quick to learn, and don't forget to show us your book, and then we'll go to
The book, here it is in Hebrew. It came out with a
oh,
new,
wow.
it doesn't have the same pun, Paradigm Lost, as it does in English, but it's from Wrestling Press.
And what is it about?
From two-state solution to one-state reality. Why did the two-state solution end up in oblivion when it was such a great idea? And what are the dynamics and implications of the acceptance that there's one and only one state now between the river and the sea, and it's not democratic, but it can change. That's
Okay. All right, Charles and Len, and then closing argument. Very quick, guys. Good.
Very, very quick point of clarification on the issue of sovereignty. My understanding is that citizenship. My understanding is that the Netanyahu's proposal that citizenship be denied everyone except ethnic Jews within the state of Israel basically was allowed to not be renewed by the Knesset, and therefore their citizenship was not affected. And that is the current situation.
That is
and
not.
that
That's
I
bullshit.
don't know what proposal, I don't think Netanyahu ever made such a proposal.
It's not such a thing.
well, I seem to recall there was a very big dust up about the fact that he was, or the right was, and it provisionally passed, and then it had to be renewed or something before it actually went into effect, and it was allowed to expire.
I think he may have been thinking about
Holy crap.
argument about spouses, but it's even more complicated than that.
Yeah.
And under the IPC, the idea of citizenship for Palestinians is that basically, Joseph, you're saying that this, who determines a Palestinian citizen is
I am
within-
saying that the Palestinians have citizenship, the Palestinian government, the PA gives citizenship to all its citizens. They have numbers, they have names, they have identity card for all the Palestinian citizens in the West Bank and Gaza and Jerusalem.
and then the Israeli government has the same for those
Yes.
inside
Yes.
Israel.
Yes, yes. We actually looked at those records when we did the election. we actually look at the records of the Israeli statistical government and the Palestinian statistical government. They have them to the T.
So let me show you how Joseph and I disagree on this. When Hannah Arendt says that the first step in the Holocaust was taking away citizenship and making German Jews stateless, they still had German identity cards. They just didn't have citizenship. They were stateless. Okay, it doesn't mean they weren't being surveyed or information about them wasn't in the hands of the government. So, I mean, I'm not comparing the two governments, but citizenship is a body of rights, and it's a status, and has to do with equality across all citizens. And that is what is missing for, say, East Jerusalem Arabs are not citizens of the country of Israel. They are citizens of the city of Jerusalem. And citizenship as something that gives you a state passport is not something that they have from the Palestinian Authority either.
Under the constitution of the IPC, a Palestinian is someone who is recognized by the Palestinian government as a citizen of Palestine. Israeli is someone who is recognized by the Israeli government as the Israeli citizen. All right, let's go to Len, and then we'll go to closing remarks. And your book, I'm sorry, yeah.
This is the book.
Yeah,
It's more
paradigm.
important what's inside of it than what's outside.
Yeah, okay.
My
Len,
first comment is, as far as Israel's right of return, nobody in the world has a right to comment on that. Israel has every right to provide Jews. They've been persecuted by the Christians, persecuted by the Muslims long enough, and Israel has a right to this. The same as you can't tell Spain now that they don't have a right of return for people who used to be Spanish. So they've got a right of return when there is two-state solution, and there has to be a two-state solution. Otherwise, you are destroying the Jewish state. I know it, and you know it. There has to be a two-state solution, and the Arabs can do whatever they want on their side of the border, and that's why there has to be a two-state solution. And as far as universities in America, they are the center of anti-Semitism in America. With the Balkan Brotherhood and the BDS movement and the Israel apartheid, I know professors, Jewish professors, and they are terrified. They can't open their mouths in their schools. They're going to get slammed by the students and slammed by the staff. And America, academia is very left-wing, which is basically anti-American, anti-white, and anti-Semitic.
all right. Professor, do you have any comments on that, or shall we go?
I'll just say, yeah, I mean, I've been teaching in American universities since 1975. And if you want to see intimidation real, you see it the other way. That it's been extremely difficult until recently for Palestinian or pro-Palestinian views to be heard at all. Just look at the number of courses taught and by whom. I personally support the BDS movement, and I am far from anti-Semitic. I'm a Zionist.
The BDS movement is genocidal.
Yeah, okay.
And you're supporting killing Jews. Thank you.
Okay.
I think the audience can see how the debate over this, I just have can degenerate. But Len, graduate student, I just wrote and are presenting a very detailed paper. It's coming out in the Israel Study Review as an article on the BDS movement and Israel's reaction to it, and I urge you to read it.
I urge you to read my book too.
Wait, okay. Let's go to closing remarks. Okay, so the Israeli and the Palestinian governments are unable to make peace. We do not oppose any agreements between them for two-state, one-state, or whatever. But bottom line is they're not able to make peace, and peace is our goal. It's not necessarily one state or two state, although we do not object. We do not object to any other solution. We believe that democracy, just like the professor, equality and peace. The country of Estonia, with 9.5 million people, has 40% online voting. Common election is possible. I didn't see the professor objecting to the technical aspect of having a common election, and I think that it is possible. I want to remind you that $100 million is being spent on war between Gaza and Israel for one day. $100 million could create this common government and could create awareness of the election and could have millions of people voting. So we are asking for grassroots financial support, and we're asking you to share and participate in future simulations. And that would be it for today. I want to thank you, Professor. You did a great job. I very much enjoyed you being with us, and I think the audience did too.
Well, thank you. I appreciate your openness to hearing criticism of a project into which you've obviously poured your heart and soul.
All right. Thank you so much. And we'll see you again in the next simulation.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank
Bye-bye,
you,
everyone.
Professor.